Hello, everybody. Today we choose to talk to you about LMIAs, and I'm gonna just make a quick introduction about LMIAs. It's just the definition. It is the government authorization for a company to hire a foreign worker temporarily, and a positive LMIA just confirms that this kind of worker cannot be found in Canada as citizens, Canadian citizens, or PRs, and the foreigner sometimes qualifies to that position. Of course, there is many details. There is a couple types of LMIAs. We are going to try to address what we understand it's the most common case, and try to clarify for you how this process works and how that can benefit someone in a position as a foreign worker that qualify for a work permit under a LMIA. So I'm gonna ask now my colleague Craig, what is the process of LMIA? To whom it applies?
Sure. So to take a bit of a step back, the viewers might not know what LMIA stands for. That's Labor Market Impact Assessment. And the process involves an employer, a Canadian employer, essentially making a request to the Government of Canada to hire a foreign worker because no Canadian citizen or PR worker is available or suitable for the position. Okay. So this is different from other types of immigration applications because this actually isn't an application to Immigration Canada. It's an application to ESDC Service Canada. So it's completely related to the employer's needs rather than to a foreign worker. Although if the LMIA is approved, at that point it moves to the immigration side.
What the government Canada wants from the employers?
So what the government wants to see is that there's a real need to fill a position, and that the employer tried to find a Canadian or PR first to fill that position. So if the government believes that the employer did try to find a worker in Canada first and that there's a real need to fill a position, they'll approve the LMIA, and with the approval letter, the foreign worker can then apply for a work permit with immigration.
Okay, I see. How about the different type of programs for LMIA? So high wage, low wage, and how that impacts in the end of the process for the potential worker. So what is most likely to be approved? What is the less likely to be approved, and why?
Sure. So the two main types of LMIA applications are high wage and low wage. And the obvious difference is what the offered wages are by the employer. It should be different depending on the province, and it may be at around, for example, $24 per hour. Okay. So using that example, if it's less than $24 per hour offered, it would be under the low wage. If it's above that, it would be high wage. Okay. Sort of separate from that is an LMIA for PR, which is an LMIA application used specifically to apply for permanent residency.
Okay. How that works?
So how that works is that the employer would apply. If it's approved, the worker could apply for a work permit as they would with the high wage and low wage version, but they can also use the LMIA to apply for permanent residency. So for example, an express entry, that would give them 50 points in most skilled worker occupations.
Okay, and that's 50 points could be
game changer
a
for
game
them.
changer, yes,
Yes.
exactly for their
Yeah.
application.
But obviously, if it's a managerial position, they can get up to like 200 additional points.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
sort of elusive. Not many people are able to get that, but if it's a senior manager position in NOC 00, that is worth 200 points in express entry, and that's like night and day. That could make someone who was not at all likely to get invited to giving them a score beyond what's needed to be invited.
Yes.
So I see.
And that I think the government website, ESDC's website, shows like each province's the median wage, and based on that, employers can decide to choose under the high wage or low wage application.
Yeah, the employer can offer essentially whatever wages they want to the worker in the application, but it has to be at least the median wage or higher. So if it's, for example, a cook position in Alberta, Service Canada would determine what the median wages should be for a cook in which area of Alberta.
So like NOC, so each occupation has its prevailing wage. So employer first must offer the prevailing wage for the operating position. And then if they want to make that application under the high wage LMIA, then they have to offer that province's median wage for that specific occupation, or just that median wage for the province.
Yes, so if they
It's
wanted,
confusing. Yes.
if they wanted to reach the high wage threshold, they would have to offer the wages required, separating high wage and low wage,
Okay.
which is separate from the NOC code median wages.
Okay.
But it would also have to make sense to Service Canada. If they see a cook position offered at $25, $30 per hour, that won't really make sense to them unless the company already has other cooks that make that much money.
So I think what you're explaining to us is that just not by offering this like high wage doesn't mean like a success of the application. You need to also, or the employers also need to convince Service Canada or ESDC that the genuineness of the job offer.
Yes, exactly. So they need to show that there is a real need to fill their position. And why this comes up and why this may be a problem for employers is that in practice, many employers already have a foreign worker in mind that they want to hire or keep hired. But they must first prove that no other Canadian citizen or PR is available before they can keep this foreign worker that they already have in mind that they want to keep.
Okay, available where? Just in the province, just in the city they are located, or nationally?
Good question. So it would be anywhere across Canada. So going back to the process, at the very start of the process, the employer needs to advertise the position they want to hire for at least 30 days. They must use Job Bank and at least two other sources. It must be advertised nationally so that anyone across Canada has an opportunity to apply for the position. Yeah.
And also like websites or places where targeting the minorities people. And also I think if it's a skilled position, I think they also try to like advertise the position where those like skilled people come to and check their opportunities, job opportunities.
Yes, exactly. So it's possible to use just a general jobs website like Indeed or LinkedIn, but they should also target, as applicable, certain websites that target the position.
Like First Nations or immigrants, I guess. Okay. Okay.
Let's try more practical approach. So let's see, I'm a foreign worker. I'm looking for jobs in Canada. I got a contact from a company that is interested in hiring me. So how can I proceed from that point?
Right. So
I think it's very common, right?
For sure,
So
yes.
it happens all the time.
yes, it's extremely common to get this type of situation. Well, I would say it's more common for a foreign worker to be looking for a job but not having a job offer from a Canadian employer. In that case, it can be extremely difficult to find a supporting employer in Canada. But let's say the foreign worker does have a job offer from a Canadian employer. What happens next is actually almost entirely unrelated to the foreign worker's background. So the next steps would follow the employer only. So in this case, the employer would start by advertising the position for 30 days online. Generally, during the 30 days, the application form itself will be starting to fill out and the documents required will be collected. But the employer also has to actually make efforts to try and find a Canadian citizen or PR worker first. Mm-hmm. So they have to accept applications, interview potential candidates and things like that. And only if they don't find a suitable candidate, then they can offer the job to the foreign worker at the end of the 30 days.
Okay. But I find it a little bit irony though. Like I think typically when employers come to us or those potential employees come to us, so they already have a job offer or they already have a prospect employee that they want to hire or make that offer for them. So, but you mentioned before ESDC wants to see that the employer genuinely try to find Canadian worker or PRs first, but in the end they failed. So they are trying to make that offer to foreign nationals. But like we were just talking, often cases that arrangement is already done. So how can we actually overcome this?
That's a good question, and that is a problem that comes up. So this is where the LMIA application on paper, I think it's a good idea, and it tries to support Canadian employers and Canadian workers. But in practice, the Canadian employer may want to already hire a foreign worker. So the true purpose of the LMIA is to support the Canadian economy. It's not to support foreign workers. Mm-hmm. But if the employer does want to hire a foreign worker, they already have an arrangement with them and a job offer. They have to go through this step to be able to hire the foreign worker on a work permit.
Okay. So then it's going to be a challenge if employers receive like resume or application from a good candidate.
Right. So the employer truly should be looking to hire a Canadian citizen or PR first. And if there is a legitimately suitable candidate for the position, they should seriously consider hiring them. They should interview them, and then if they are not able to, then they can still continue with the LMIA. But during the advertising period, the employer could, in theory, find a Canadian worker and then stop the process and not continue with the LMIA.
I see.
It would be unfortunate for the foreign worker, but that's how the process should be expected to go.
Okay. I think it's really crucial that you work with someone who's really experienced with the LMIA process. Otherwise, I can see many difficulties here and there. And then I think for LMIA, employers always have to have an interview with the officer, right? And then they have to explain and convince the officer they made all the efforts they could, but they still couldn't find a qualified local worker. So they have to make that offer to a foreign national.
Exactly. So if in the application form it will ask, for example, how many Canadian citizens and PRs applied for the job. If it's a position that is, say, easier to do, has lower requirements to do the work as a higher one, and many people applied, say 50 people applied, it may be very difficult to justify to Service Canada why they couldn't find a suitable worker among the 50 that applied.
Okay.
I think we have to look for or look at the LMIA with the economic challenge that we are facing here in Canada. So even ESDC, that is the government bureau that it's gonna check or process the LMIA, they know the data. They know where the labor shortage exists and where there is like offer here workforce offer to the company. So once the company is trying to hire somewhat skilled worker that they already know there is a labor shortage, that should make easy to get the approval, right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. So if it makes sense, then it's more likely to be approved. If you have a position that's very specialized and there aren't many people available who can do that job, or the position is in a location that's, for example, very remote, very small town, both of those could be legitimate reasons the employer can't find any workers. But if it's an easier position to do, say a cook or an office administrative assistant, and it's in downtown Toronto, that could be very difficult to prove. There's no other administration assistant available in Toronto.
Okay, I understand. So after the LMIA is approved, so ESDC is Economic Development Social Canada, will issue a positive LMIA. So from there, what do you have to do?
Right, so the application has been submitted. The employer had an interview with Service Canada, and then Service Canada issued an approval letter. So an approval letter means that Service Canada believed that hiring a foreign worker would have either a neutral or positive effect on the labor market in Canada.
Okay.
So even if it's neutral, that means that it would have no negative or positive effect. It can still be approved and used to go to the next step. The next step being handing the approval letter to the foreign worker and using that to apply for a work permit.
Okay. And from the worker's side, the employee side, what he or she has to prove that before we apply for the work permit?
Yeah, so what they have to prove, first, the LMIA, the approved LMIA, is the basis for being eligible to apply for a work permit. But the worker must be able to prove that they have the skills and training and education to be able to do the job that they got the LMIA approval letter for.
Okay.
If the approval letter is for a position as a software engineer, then the worker must be able to prove that they have experience or education required by the NOC code to do the work of a software engineer.
Okay. Those requirements has nothing to do with express entry or language requirements or anything related to that. It's purely to, okay, this foreign worker is able or not to do that, to perform those tasks.
Exactly, and it's come up in my own experience that we've had an LMIA approved, but the worker didn't quite have enough education or experience related to that NOC code, and their work permit got refused, even though they had an approved LMIA. So they weren't able to prove they could do the job duties for the position.
Okay, just to clarify, one approved LMIA is not 100% guarantee that you're going to have a work permit approved.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
The LMIA makes someone eligible, but they also need to prove that they can do the job,
Okay.
which makes sense going back to the purpose of the LMIA is to help employers, help the Canadian economy. If they're trying to hire a worker that doesn't know what they're doing, that doesn't help the economy.
Okay.
So I guess it leads me to think if employer tries to make the job application as difficult as possible, so increasing a lot of job requirements, to better filter applicants, then this is going to come back at them at a later stage because their foreign worker may not be able to meet all the requirements specified in the LMIA.
Yes, exactly. So ideally, the employer should list in the job advertisement their own actual personal requirements as the employer. But oftentimes they'll sort of measure and adjust it according to what their foreign worker who they have in mind they want to hire, what their credentials are. But at a minimum, the worker must meet the credentials, the requirements of the NOC code.
So then can employer ask for any kind of requirement that they want?
Good question, and no, they can't. So even something as simple as language, if the employer wants to hire a foreign worker who speaks Spanish. They have to justify in the application why Spanish is required for their job position.
I heard that, like, technically speaking, employers cannot require any other language than English or French unless there's a really significant rationale for that specific language. Employer cannot just say like, oh, I don't feel comfortable speaking in English or French, so I prefer dealing with someone who can speak Korean, for example. Correct?
That's exactly right. So even if, for example, the employer runs a Korean restaurant, the employer is Korean, maybe they speak Korean as their first language, they want to hire another Korean who they think would be a good fit to work for them. They must require either English or French in the application. They may request someone who speaks Korean if they can justify why this person must speak Korean. But it can't be simply
Very
because
challenging.
they want to talk to them in Korean.
I think my limited understanding is like when you can ask for other language, the third language is like the job is like interpretation or translation, something like that. Those jobs you definitely need some abilities to like read or write foreign language. But other than that, I heard it's extremely difficult to convince Service Canada.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've had a situation where the employer had many clients who spoke Chinese. So that's how they justified needing someone who spoke Chinese, is because this person would regularly speak Chinese with clients or customers.
Yeah, but using this example, okay, speak Korean is not something that you must or you can require just because it's hard to justify in the kitchen as a cook. But if it is a traditional Korean restaurant, for example, and they just cook Korean food, there is no other source of Korean cooks here or schools or any other institution that can provide those trainings, it is legitimate to require someone that knows how to cook Korean dishes, for example.
It can be, yes.
Okay.
So in that case, the NOC code would be for a cook in general, but the employer can also say that they prefer someone who has experience in Korean
Cuisine.
cuisine.
I think that's definitely I think possible. But then if that employer wants someone who speaks Korean language, then that's probably gonna be a tough call. I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see.
So we talked a lot about like employees and the nature of LMIA. So how about like employers? So can any company sponsor labor market impact assessment, or can anyone can I want to hire a foreign worker? Is it possible?
It depends on the situation. And for example, if it's a low-wage LMIA, there's a cap, a percentage of how many workers can be foreign workers in the company, which is 10%.
Okay.
If it's high wage, there are fewer restrictions, but the employer still needs to show basic business documents that show that the business is legitimate, can afford to hire the worker on a salary, and that they've been in operation for a certain amount of time. So say this new startup Canadian employer wants to hire only foreign workers. Even if they're eligible on paper to apply for the LMIA, they might have a very difficult time justifying to Service Canada why they only want to hire foreign workers and why no Canadian workers are available for all of these positions.
How about like sometimes I hear like they didn't even really try to find someone in Canada, but they're saying, "Oh, we used to work together back home, so they know all how these people. They know how all this works. We've been working together for like 10 years. It's going to be very efficient, and we know that if we do it this way, it's going to be very successful." Like based on this kind of claim, can employers convince Service Canada?
Not at that point. At the work permit application stage, maybe the worker is eligible and will be approved, but prior to that, the employer still needs to show, like anyone else, that they tried to hire a Canadian or local candidate first.
So then, like, really the role of Service Canada or ESDC is protect the Canadian labor market, not just about giving out a paper that can help employees to apply for work permit.
Exactly. And that's where a negative decision on an LMIA comes in. If it's negative, that means Service Canada believes the hiring of a foreign worker may take away from the Canadian economy, for example, by taking the job away from a potential Canadian worker.
Okay.
And also, sorry, I have many questions. I get
fine.
those kind of inquiries all the time. So, that during COVID-19, obviously, restaurant businesses had a huge hit economically, financially. So now, one day I'm getting a call saying, "Oh, I want to support my, cook to apply for the, permanent residence." But when I look at their financial documents, last year they had a huge loss, in their business. In this case, can they still support the PR LMIA?
It may still be possible, using COVID as a special case exception to that. And in that case, Service Canada may look at previous years' financial statements to see a pattern of making a profit every year prior to that.
So if the business hasn't been making profit, so obviously the employer has always been funding the company, so this is going to have a negative impact.
It most likely will. So it's not specifically a profit that the company has to be making year over year, but Service Canada has to see that the employer has the funds to pay for the workers' wages. So if the offered wages are, say, $40,000 per year, the employer needs to show they have at least $40,000 available to run their business and hire the foreign worker.
Okay.
So, how this can impact on for someone as it's intent to immigrate to Canada? So after that, okay, LMIA approval, work permit approval, and from that on, what we have to do?
So from the work permit approval, everything's been approved so far. They get their work permit when they arrive in Canada. They'll get a closed work permit. That's an employer-specific work permit. It'll dictate the name of the employer, the location, the job title, and possibly an OC code. So the employee, the worker, can only work for that employer in that location.
Okay, it's very specific.
Yes, it's very specific.
In 2 years.
Generally 2 years. It can be for less time. It could be for more time, but you would have to explain in the application why you're requesting that certain amount of time.
Okay.
But during the time on their work permit, they're allowed to work for that employer and can continue working and use that work experience to apply for permanent residency. Even if it's a low-skill position, depending on the province and if there's a PNP stream available, they may still be able to apply for PR even as a low-skill worker, depending on what provincial nominee program might be available.
Okay.
So employers who are looking to go through this process now, who are ready to begin this process, how long are they looking to wait to get this document?
So despite the effects of COVID causing delays across the board in all of immigration, surprisingly, Service Canada has been processing LMIAs fairly quickly in recent times, quicker than they were before COVID. So right now, processing times depend on the type of LMIA, but employers could expect to have to wait perhaps 2 months or so after submitting the LMIA to get a notice back from Service Canada to have an interview.
Okay.
So add that to the 30 days required for advertising. They're looking at about 3 months to have an interview, and then shortly after the interview get a decision on the LMIA.
Okay.
It's pretty fast.
Relative to the rest of processing in Canada's various departments, it's fairly fast, yes.
How about the work permit?
The processing of the work permit does depend on the country where the person applies from.
Okay.
In Canada right now, I think it's about 3 months to process a work permit.
Okay.
But outside, it depends on the visa office where the worker applies from.
Okay. And I think employers sometimes see this as opportunity, or see this as they're helping their employees, foreign nationals, to get the work permit and come to Canada. So they think they are not financially responsible for any of this process. Is it true?
That is not at all true. So the employer has to realize that they're applying for the LMIA to help their business, not to help the foreign worker. And because the application is only made by the employer, only the employer can pay for the LMIA application itself, which is $1,000, as well as the costs of job advertising. And if it's a low-wage LMIA, the employer also has to provide things like setting up housing, health insurance for the worker when they arrive first in Canada. So the employer does need to support the worker who they want to work with them at their company.
I think for the low wage, low skill, they also need to pay the transportation for the employees, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. So employers, they need to realize, like you just said, this application is to help their business to run better, more smooth, not just trying to help those foreign nationals to apply for a work permit.
Exactly. And if the employer does try to, say, get reimbursement from the employee, for example, they may want them to pay for the LMIA, justifying, I got you this job, so you should pay it back. That is illegal.
Okay.
And then they could be on blacklist too.
Yes, they could. If Service Canada finds out, there's a chance they could be put on a blacklist, which is published publicly for anyone in the world to see online on Service Canada's website. And speaking of that, it's possible that Service Canada could come to the employer's company in person to do a random check to see if they're complying with the conditions of the LMIA application.
Mm-hmm. So employers are responsible to show their compliance?
That's right. So they have to be able to show, for example, that they're paying the worker the wages that they said they would pay in the application itself.
Okay. And then probably for the high wage position, in their next LMI application, they need to demonstrate they have fulfilled what they promised in their previous application. Is it correct?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And in the case of abuse, or if the employer it's not treating well the worker, or not comply with the promise from the job offer, what is the option for the worker? So
there is a very specific option, which you are probably familiar with, is if the worker is being abused and is able to prove this, they can apply for an open work permit to stay in Canada while they're able to settle their things and get away from the abusive employer.
okay.
But the problem is that they must be able to prove that they have this kind of abuse from the employer at their job.
Okay. It's probably not easy to obviously keep all the evidence and also report based on their situation in Canada, because they're far away from their home and they're relying on the employer.
Yeah, it can be very difficult for workers in these kinds of situations.
Okay. I think we've talked enough about the LMIA and the work permit. Of course, we will maybe talk more about specific process steps of the work permit application and the types of the work permit in the future. But I think we can probably wrap up for the LMIA.
Definitely, we didn't talk all,
Yes.
but I think the most common topics we were able to explain or try to understand better. But of course, every case requires more attention to figure out which program should we apply or not. So every case has to be addressed as unique
Sure.
in the LMIA process.
Okay.
So it's all. Thank you very much, guys, and see you next time.
See you.